Hey everybody, and welcome to the show. We've got a good one for you tonight, and a very special guest who sat right beside me, and that would be my beautiful wife, Lynn. How are you, darling?
Very well, thank you.
That's good. Now you, Jeremy?
Not bad at all.
Yeah. He's gone quiet now.
No, I'm just waiting,
Just waiting. Well, as
not
you,
to be sick.
yeah. Well, as you know by the thumbnail, we're talking about reincarnation and past lives tonight. So it's a very interesting topic, and I'm going to let Lynn start a little bit because she's been really keen on it for a very long time, super interested in it, and she knows more about it than both Jeremy and myself put together. So
By about a week. But
That's better than nothing.
it is, yes. I mean, I do have some personal experience. When I was a child, I remembered. It's very difficult to put this into words. I remember remembering my past life. It's a little bit like when you have a dream. You know, when you wake up from a dream and it's really vivid in your memory, and then 10 o'clock in the morning you try to remember the dream. You remember having the dream, but you can only remember flashes of it.
Would that not be Inception?
No, that's just what dreams. Well, that's what my dream experience is like. I remember it really clearly when I wake up, and then as the day goes on, and that's what my past life memories are like. I do remember that I remembered them, and I remember talking to my mother about them. And she, like most Western people, sort of say to their children, "Oh, it's just your imagination." So you don't try to remember because it's not part of our culture to remember your past life. So yeah.
The same goes for invisible friends. Like children have invisible friends, and all of a sudden they come to an age, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh well.
Yeah, that's
no,
true.
you just didn't think.
Yeah, my son had an imaginary friend when he was a little boy, and I always encouraged it, actually, because I'm different, I guess. But I'm not saying that my parents were bad. I think it's fairly normal in Western culture to put things like that down to children's imagination, because we're not, I guess, as spiritually inclined culturally, I guess.
not culturally, no.
No, yeah, probably in modern times anyway.
And it's funny as well when you talk about imaginary friends and things, because it leads into a whole different kettle of fish, doesn't it? I mean, not that we're talking about that tonight, but you know, you're getting into spirits and things like that hanging around.
Well, I had an imaginary friend called Jenny when I was a little girl as well, so I was obviously quite in touch with things. But as I said, I do remember very vaguely my past life, and as I got older, or past lives, and as I got older, I'm always have one foot in the skeptical. I can think maybe that was just my imagination, maybe I was just making stories up in my head. I don't know. I will never know because I'm not a child anymore. But it's still interesting. It's interesting. So as I got older, I did a couple of past life readings, which were very illuminating. And Gary and I had a personal experience together that was actually huge, wasn't it, at the time? Yeah, a very, very, which tied into the past life reading that I had. And I had never, it was my first experience with a psychic. I went in very skeptical, and I came out very intrigued by the experience because she knew a lot of things that she couldn't possibly have found out on Facebook, or even if she rang my family. They were quite intimate, not intimate, but small details about my childhood and things like that. Stop it.
You keep knocking the microphone.
Sorry.
These two.
I think
Arguing like
in
a
my
married
past
couple.
life I was Italian, so I use my hands a lot.
Oh no, we're going to have to stop this one now.
No, stop. Everyone stop. Let's be appropriate.
Lynn's saying let's be appropriate.
Okay, I'm on my best behaviour.
That was a sexy
It
voice.
wasn't one of these little tents that was sitting on the side of the footpath at a farmer's market that you went into by any chance, was it?
Actually, funny you should... No, not one of them, but the thing she was talking about where we had that shared experience was actually a place called Echoes. I think I've told you about it before, back at my old dojo. They had this sound chamber where they used the gongs, the crystal bowls, and all that sort of thing. And it's ridiculous how they can actually send you on a journey without... with sound and vibration. You know, I mean, they say everything vibrates at certain frequencies. Yeah. And this just proved that point. And yeah, we shared something.
Our experience was before I met Gary. There I go again. Before
You were happy?
No, I'm very happy, Jeremy. I went to this. I was given the reading as a birthday gift from my daughters because they felt I needed a little bit of spiritual guidance, I guess. I was going through quite a hard time, and as I said, I went in skeptical with a lot of skepticism, and the lady put me at ease straight away. And she was a psychic, so that wasn't meant to be a past life reading, but very quickly she decided to turn it into a past life reading because I think she felt that would help. Learning a little bit about my past would help me through my struggles in the future. So long story short, part of what she told me was that I had a husband in almost ancient times, like Egyptian times. She said she wasn't sure if it was Egypt, but it was a long time ago, a significantly long time ago, in a like a village sort of setting. But my husband was a warrior, and our son betrayed us. And she also, this as again, there was quite a bit more to it, but she also said that everyone in that lifetime, souls are drawn back together anyway, but she said often it might be 2 or 3 souls. Sometimes it's all of them, and that's a significant learning lifetime that you're going through. Like you've all come back together to bring your lessons that you've learnt from each other and try and fix some things and, all that kind of thing. Anyway, again, long story short. But then she went on to describe a man that I was going to meet, and pretty well described Gary. And not just physically, but also as a person. She really got quite nitty-gritty about what kind of person he was going to be. And I was sort of, yeah, okay, bald guy, beard, there's a lot of those. But she said, you're going to meet this guy and you have to get yourself ready because this is a big one. She said, you are going to be reunited with your previous husband who was killed violently by your son. So I went away with that and thought, maybe true, maybe not, didn't think about it for a long time. Met Gary, he got me quite interested in this kind of thing anyway, obviously, because it's his interest, but then invited me quite early on in our relationship. We went to Echoes. And I wasn't really sure what to expect. I hadn't delved into this. I've always been interested in the spiritual side of life, but haven't really delved into it. So I was busy raising children and all those kind of things. And so I had no expectations. And then, as Gary described, you lay down, there's the gongs, there's didgeridoo, there's a lot of things that are quite, there's a word for it. I can't think of the word, but it's a lot of the science of sound, which I'm grasping for the name of, but that's where it's based and how it affects you physically. When you listen to a really good heavy metal song and it makes your hair stand on end, that kind of thing. But you do actually go off into another place, and everybody has a very, very individual experience. So once we had gone through that gong session, sorry, Gary, we were invited, we didn't have to, around the circle, because there was, maybe 25, 30 people in there?
No, they max out at 14.
Oh, okay, it felt like more. Anyway, everybody was invited to share what they experienced. Some people said they saw kangaroos and the spirits of Indigenous people and those kind of things, which made sense given where we were. Other people, there was lots of different experiences, but when she got to me, I was actually quite emotional about where I'd gone. I hadn't even thought about that past life reading for a good few months, and had never shared with Gary that either, apart from telling him that somebody told me that I was going to meet him. That's about all I told you, wasn't it? So I said, no, I don't really want to talk about it at the moment. Gary said, to the lady who ran it, can we talk about it elsewhere? So, not in front of the rest of the people. So she took us aside and Gary started talking, and he basically told the same story that the past life psychic had told me from his perspective. And I just burst into tears because that's where I had been as well during the gong session. So it was very, what's the word?
Freaky.
Well, freaky is not the word. It was
Humbling?
Not freaky.
A profound experience.
Yeah,
it was profound.
So what you're saying is we need to get your sons and lock them up.
No, well, it's not necessarily our sons. I actually have a theory about who it is, but I don't really want to bring it up here. But it's
Do it.
I don't want to bring it up here, but it's interesting how there's some coincidences along the way that make you go, that makes sense. But anyway, Gary and I was.
Or are they just flags?
Gary and I were supposed to meet, and we knew that from that night onwards, which was good for us. But yeah, no, that was really interesting. And as I said, I'm still very skeptical. I'll always be skeptical about things because they're very difficult to prove, which is where you lead into reading about it and finding out what other people have studied and discovered. And when you look online, there's a lot of airy-fairy
There's heaps
stuff.
Like you think about some of the stuff that you actually do read with the stories on the internet. It's like, well, these people have been around when you've got the internet. You've got all these things at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Then you go to look into it more, and it's like these are toddlers talking about things that happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah. That's when it gets odd.
Considering like the 90s was the revolution of the internet.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. And we were talking about it before we started recording. There was a doctor who was credible. He was the real deal, who through the 20th century spent decades studying past life. He was the head of department at, I've got it written here, the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology at the University of Virginia. So he was a psychiatrist and also a general physician, I believe, from my reading. So he was credible, and not just credible, but also the kind of person who didn't just read something and take it for gospel. Like we all know people like that nowadays. But he researched, he studied, he went out there and traveled the world and studied all these amazing stories of people who have these really interesting past life experiences and stories. And he spent the better part of his life doing that. So, and some of the stories that he recorded, very compelling. Like, how does a child know that, particularly when he was doing it, as you said before, Jeremy, this was before the internet. This was during the 50s, 60s, 70s. He only died in 2007, but he died. But it was sort of before the internet, before kids could find out all these things. And I mean, how does a 2-year-old, and this is the story that I was going to lead into, the one that interested me a lot, I think partly because the little boy came from Middlesbrough, which is where Gary comes from, so automatically it was interesting. But what I really liked about the story of this little boy called Carl Eden, is that right? Carl Eden?
I don't know the name.
Oh, okay. You were talking about it
You're
before.
telling the story.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay.
I've touched on it lightly, but I don't know the names. The person that you're talking about that studied, that wasn't Jim Tucker, was it?
No, this is Dr. Ian Stevenson.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
No, because you got another guy that's similar position for the University of Virginia,
Yeah.
Jim Tucker.
Yeah, well, they possibly knew each other. But this little boy because basically what led Dr. Stevenson to start going to places like the UK and more locally, obviously, I think he was Canadian, but in America and places like that, was because when he first began his research, he went to places like Asia, Africa, South America. Now, these are people who are probably a little bit more connected spiritually. They already believe in reincarnation.
Especially the Africans and the tribes.
Yeah, it's already a core belief in their culture. So it was very easy for him to find stories. So a lot of skeptics straight away put that to, well, these people believe in reincarnation. They're just making shit up. Stuff up.
We're all adults here.
But so he decided, okay, fine, I'll go a little bit more local or more Western culture, because he wanted to prove that it wasn't just his theory. It was more that in a culture where people already believe in reincarnation, the parents are open to listening to the children's stories. Whereas, like I said about my mum before, and no offense to my mother because she's wonderful, but she just said it's just your imagination. She didn't even encourage me to keep talking. Do you know what I mean? So
I think that's just the easiest way to like keep your children quiet. It's like, off you go play.
Yeah, exactly. So but one of the stories that really caught my attention, and I have committed to memory, and many of the others I haven't committed to memory, as we discovered earlier, was a little boy called Carl Eden, I think his name was, who, when he was 2 years old, he started drawing eagles. Sorry. And the mother thought it was strange. It was quite almost like an eagle symbol. Well, it was an eagle symbol. That was the first sign. Then he started drawing swastikas. And then the mother was sort of like, that's unusual, because it's not like there were swastikas everywhere in early 70s England for obvious historical reasons.
I'm not going to count for
But
that.
70s. Oh, Gary, early 70s, was that where the Indians had come over from there to the UK?
Yes.
With everything else happened, so you still would have had this Hindu symbol there.
No, well, it wasn't where I grew up, which is basically the same place.
Middlesbrough,
Yeah, Middlesbrough. There was no symbology out and about, so you never saw that. It might have been the case inside their homes, but it wasn't a public thing. It's the same with the Chinese and things like that, you know. You would never see much of that stuff, so you're hitting buttons on the computer making funny noises.
Sorry.
I'm not trying to debunk what
No,
you're saying.
I know that. No, that's exactly why you have the podcast, isn't it? To talk, to thresh it out. But so as he got older, that was when he was quite young. But as he got older, sort of 4 or 5, he started drawing exact to dials and levers and buttons the cockpit of a. I'm going to say this right, Messerschmitt.
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 Can I interrupt just 1 second? Jeremy is slowly sinking and sinking and sinking.
My camera must be moving. Hang on.
It's quicksand. We'll do a podcast on quicksand another time.
But yes, Messerschmitt is a German fighter from World War II.
So, but
technical difficulties. There we go.
So this 4-year-old child had definitely never seen the cockpit of a Messerschmitt, whatever, however you say, airplane.
Out of all people to talk about aircraft sitting next to you,
so anyway, so that became interesting, obviously, to his parents. His dad was very, very skeptical and tried to catch him out a number of times, because this kid started talking about parts of airplanes and could describe a German soldier's uniform down to buttons and collars and to minute details. When they watched movies that depicted German soldiers, he would laugh at it. That's not what the uniforms were like, and think very, very specific memories that this child had. Then he started talking about he woke up from a nightmare one night, and his mum, obviously he was crying, and his mum obviously went into his room, and he started talking about when he died, and that he remembers going very black and waking up surrounded by glass, and his leg had been severed by the glass. So he thought that his plane had crashed through a window. That was his understanding of that.
Yep.
And that he remembered his 19-year-old. That he wasn't worried about. He knew he was going to die. He was bleeding out, but he wasn't sad for himself because he'd chosen to be a soldier. But he was sad for his 19-year-old fiance back at home, and that in his village in Germany, which was interesting. They had discovered. Sorry, go on.
That's right.
No, they had discovered I am talking a lot, aren't I?
No.
They had discovered the fuselage of a plane. I'll wrap it up a bit, and it had 3 bodies in it, and they thought there should have been 4, but they thought perhaps because it had caught on fire that the body had completely burned to nothing. This was back in 1942, and what they did with that plane was just bury it. So there was nothing. It wasn't historically well known in the area because you didn't really celebrate German soldiers well, they knew, but they didn't talk about it a lot. That's it at the time.
Do you know where they were buried?
In what's your town called?
Thornaby.
Yeah, they're buried in Thornaby. But then what happened? He was, again, cutting a long story short. There was a lot more. That he experienced.
We got time.
What else have I got here?
Anyway, no, before you change the subject on that, there's a couple of things about that which I'm a little dubious about. I mean, obviously, Thornaby, which is the town that I grew up in and where Lynn said they were buried, in World War II, it was actually a main airbase, and where my nana lived was actually the old airbase. They'd knocked it, when they bolted over, they built houses there, and that's where my nana lived. But not far from that were the old air raid bunkers, and they were still there when I was a kid because we used to go playing in them. They'd caved in, but they were still there. But no, hang on. So where I'm going is, yes, that definitely would happen because there were always bits being found locally. But my only gripe with that story is if he was specific to a Messerschmitt never had 4 people. A Messerschmitt was only a single cockpit fighter.
That's what his dad thought, but apparently they proved that this.
What about Dornier 217E-4?
I don't know that one, but it could have been a Heinkel as well.
That was one of the. I can't remember the details exactly, but that the dad thought that, his father thought that as well, but then was proven to be not completely true. Whether there was I can't remember, Gary. I'm so sorry.
The one, actually, I found my notes from the first time I spoke a little bit about this, not in detail at all. What someone had actually found and come across, that it was a Dornier 217E that had dropped 2 highly explosive bombs on Skingrove Steelworks.
Yep.
And flew along Teesmouth to drop a bomb on the Eston jetty. And they had actually struck a wire and took the wing off the plane.
I know Eston. And
Skingrove is where he ended up working when he was older. Yeah. And so then what happened, where I was going with it, is that in 1992, he was born in 1972. At the age of 20, he was murdered, this young guy. And not long afterwards, they actually, waterboard workers were digging pipes and found the plane fuselage that had been previously buried, and they found a skeleton, the missing soldier, who had been the gunner. So he was in the glass bubble.
Yeah, well, that's definitely not a Messerschmitt, but yes.
And when he was thrown out of the glass bubble, his leg was cut off. His right leg was cut off.
See, what you're describing there sounds so much like a Heinkel. A big glass dome at the front that had a gunner turret up on the top and at the back.
Pull up.
Do you think, though, perhaps he drew the Messerschmitt when he was little, but he wasn't in that plane when he was killed? That's the other way you could explain it. Maybe he knew that, because he wasn't the pilot in this particular case. He was the gunner.
Even the 217E. Oh yeah, if you pull up a picture, Gary, or get Lynn or yourself to pull up a picture of the Dornier 217E4. They actually do have. It's not a huge glass bubble, but you can see underneath at the front where they would have had a glass window for them to see through. And that was a Nazi aircraft.
Well, a German aircraft. The misconception is that every German is a Nazi, and it's not the case.
Well, no, it has the swastika on the back on the.
That was a German symbol, but not everyone was a Nazi. The Nazi party was separate to the German. Yeah.
It was interesting because he knew a lot of things. This little boy, and it was interesting.
So he was buried with full honours. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, he was. Yeah. Yeah, he was. I think they reburied the other 3 because they were originally buried in unmarked graves, but then eventually, obviously, when history, as time goes on, they reburied them, and there was a bit of pomp and fanfare involved in doing that.
Yes.
Yeah, and the 4 of them were buried together. But the other interesting thing about it too, and this is all, it's just fluff really, because this can happen in any family, but it's still interesting, when they actually discovered this body, and then they obviously could identify who the 4th and missing soldier was, he actually bore a striking resemblance to Carl Eden, like very striking, and I've seen the photos. And Carl's family were all dark-skinned, not like tanned easy type dark-skinned, olive-skinned, and dark-haired, dark eyes, and he was blonde and blue-eyed. So it's interesting. That was the story that stuck with me the most, mostly because of the Middlesbrough connection. And what I like about it is that you can actually back a lot of it up with things that actually happened. But
Are the brick... Sorry.
Go on.
Are the brickworks still there, Gary?
I don't know. I've been here for over 40 years.
Oh, well... yeah, I suppose so.
And I didn't really know there was a lot growing up in and around Middlesbrough, because Middlesbrough's the major town, and then you've got the River Tees, and on the other side of the River Tees is Stockton, which is another sort of major town. Now, smack bang between the two of them on the opposite side to Stockton is Thornaby, right on the edge of the River Tees. Now, that's been around, like I said, since the year 700 and something in its current sort of naming thing. So it's old, and it was definitely there in 1066 when the Doomsday Book was written after the Battle of Hastings. So it's not just the war history around the place. You can walk through the town there and you will find houses that were built in the 1600s, 1700s. And obviously when it came to like the Second World War and stuff like that, they played a major part, because obviously it's on the northeast coast, so it was a direct run across the English Channel, albeit not quite as close as it would have been from down south, but it was still a target because they came in through Scotland quite often. So all of that, I've got no hesitation in saying, yeah, that sort of thing used to happen, you know. But one of the other things about growing up in and around there is also the spirituality of the place, and it makes you wonder how many people actually do believe in reincarnation and stuff, because there was a lot of weird things were happening where I grew up, and that this is just another story to add to it all. So I know when I was a kid, and this is probably a completely different sort of podcast sort of subject all on its own. I used to have this recurring dream, and it was, when I actually shared it, it was actually put to me that it's not a recurring dream as such. It's a glimpse of a past life, how one of your past lives ended. And they said, and this has been backed up in many different cultures, you don't just come back once. You know, we talked about this the other night, talking about energy and stuff like that. Energy can't be destroyed; it can only be transformed.
Yeah, same as matter.
Yeah, and so when the body dies, the energy, which is the soul, I guess, moves on into different forms and what have you. So it's very, very possible, if not likely, that you will come back. And it comes down to, for me, is when you kickstart into a new life, most people don't have memories of past lives, but some people, it's almost like there's a little glitch in the matrix, do have these flashbacks, and they're the interesting stories that actually make a topic like this so intriguing.
What they found in the study too was that a fair percentage, over 50% of children that remember, because it is mostly children that remember vividly, past lives, the death that they experienced was either premature or quite violent, so quite memorable. And
that is a big thing for what I had. Yeah. My dream was like that.
And often there's a birthmark in the place. Carl Eden was one of them, the one that I was talking about. He had a a pronounced birthmark on the top of his right leg, which he said he had lost, and which that the skeletal remains of Heinrich, I can't think of his surname, also his leg was missing. It wasn't missing, but it was...
Well, geez, what does it mean if you got a birthmark on your face then?
I don't know, we got shot in the face or bashed in the face or something.
You leave my daughter out of this.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look, it really sucks that it takes you to become an adult into an age of understanding of what, previous lives could be, to then going, I wish I could remember what I did as a child.
Yeah, what you remembered, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what Lynn was talking about at the start about one of our first dates when we went to this place called Echoes. They're gone now, so we can't do one of their sessions again, but there are other places around. I think there's another one in WA somewhere, but I know there's definitely heaps all around the world. And Dorothy, who used to run Echoes, she's an intriguing young lady herself. She's got some stories that she can tell you about. She used to be part of a special team that worked out of the Vatican, and might have to get her on. Yeah, and when she started this whole thing up, it was more of a spiritual thing, and she was actually part of an international study, and we were the only, they were the only one in Australia that were part of this international study at the time. And what it was, apparently using these sound waves from like the didgeridoos, they had the gongs, they had the crystal bowls, so it does initially get very loud, but what you find is the noise seems to disappear, and you're feeling it. You're feeling it rather than hearing it.
Yep.
And it's been scientifically proven that it takes your brain into the certain, I can't remember the theta waves, through the different waves,
or
frequencies and things like that. And it's when they hit certain points that these strange things start to happen. Now, everybody has something different. And where Echoes was located was right on a convergence of the ley lines, and one of them being the main ley line that went to Uluru. So when Lynn was saying about how lots of people saw Aboriginal elders hanging around, that actually ties into the first time I did a WAPA session there, and our old psychic, she got this massive hit on the Aboriginal elders and stuff, and it ended up Dorothy asked myself and the old psychic to go to dinner at their place so we could chat about what we do and what she does. And she actually pulled out this little medicine bag kind of thing and gave it to the psychic and asked her to describe what was in it. And these things that she described was so obscure and so weird. I go, no, this is, she's going to make a fool out of us, But then when Dorothy said to open it, she was bang on with everything. And that was the first real glimpse that I saw that a psychic, there are real psychics out there. I mean, there's obviously a lot of,
Yes, Sunday market psychics.
Yeah, but she was the real deal. And what she was saying about Echoes is that when you go through the different waves and whatever, the vibrations and stuff, everybody reacts differently. And what she would do is she would go around each of the beds, because they call them beds, they're just like a little yoga mat on the floor basically, and ask if you wanted to describe what you felt and what you experienced. And some would share, some wanted to keep private about the whole thing. And this particular one that I had, I wanted to keep quiet about it, but we ended up speaking with Dorothy privately afterwards, and then I said what I experienced, and that's when Lynn, she went white and got quite emotional, and then she shared what she experienced and what she'd been told previously. And that's when I knew, well, that she was a keeper, I guess. She's still here, so something went right there. But it's also very interesting that sound and vibration can have a way of triggering past life experiences.
Well, you think about it with music. You listen to certain music, it's nostalgic. You know,
Even
is that
smell,
a way
sometimes
of
you-
vibrations and frequencies to trigger other things in your mind? Like you look at music from 60s, 70s, 80s to music now, different frequencies, different tempos, and it makes you feel a completely different way. I can't stand it myself, but
What I find, one of the other things I find interesting as well is they say that the human brain remembers everything you've seen, experienced, and everything throughout your whole life. And you go, nah, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, you know. But sometimes a certain sound, a certain smell, and then boom, a certain taste that I haven't had the sensation of since I was about 12 years old triggers things. I go, okay, so that every single bit is still there. It's just you need the right trigger to bring it out. So with past lives, what's not to say in that 90% of the brain that we don't use, all of our past lives are stored there as well, and just every now and then they'll trigger things which, like in this Carl's instance, it was triggering memories of when he was in the war and things like that. And it's just a matter of being able to recognise what they are and speaking to the right people.
Kid used to goose step through the schoolyard till kids started teasing him.
I've got to admit, there was a few of us used to do that from watching Benny Hill and things.
Maybe. But going back to Dorothy, the other really interesting conversation we had that night, and I'm not going to pretend I have any knowledge of this particular theory. I did try and have a look into it a little bit, but ran out of time. She talked to us about genetic memory, which is another whole theory that some people try to use to explain why people remember past lives. It's not so much a spiritual, your soul's gone from another body, it's just that your grandparents and your parents and your great-grandparents and a little part of each of those people is still there, and those memories are still there somewhere, that's an interesting theory. A lot of people debunk it and think that it's ridiculous, but it's still interesting at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah, but science says everything's ridiculous until they find somebody who proves it correct, and then it becomes the new norm, and then you move on from there.
Yeah. And I think what this Dr. Stevenson, I don't know whether he ever really convinced himself completely that past lives were an actual truth, I guess, but he was very interested in it. He spent his whole life studying it, and the reason he began researching it in the first place was because he believed the theory that a lot of science around psychology and that kind of thing, that we are formed as a child and our personality is set when we're a child. He didn't think that was enough, that there's got to be more to that we're formed by history and past life experience, like not necessarily past life experiences, but genetic experiences as well. I mean, I know it is a little bit like some mental health conditions, like anxiety. If your parents have got anxiety, there's a good chance you're going to have anxiety. Do you know what I mean? So,
I feel sorry for my kid.
Well, same, but it's apparently has come to pass. But there's a reason I use anxiety as an example. But it's very hard to quantify or prove, isn't it?
Have you ever had it yourself where you've been going through shops and you see some sort of food that you physically haven't had before, but you know in the back of the head that you've had and you like it and you enjoy it?
Yeah, and the other thing is phobias. He delved quite a lot into phobias. Kids that lived in the middle of the country, or whatever country that was, were terrified of the ocean. They've never been to the ocean, but they're terrified of it, or they're terrified of fire, or that was another of his theories, were phobias actually a past life.
Yeah.
I don't know, what would be the word? Past life shadow, I suppose, or past life memory, something that you're really terrified of because that's what bloody got you. So,
no. You're right, Jeremy. It's going quiet over there, mate.
No, I'm good. I was listening.
No, I think we might call it for tonight. We've been going for a while.
Really?
Have you got more you want to add?
Not. There's always lots you can always
Oh,
add.
there's heaps.
Oh, we can go on forever,
Yeah.
but I just don't want to bore everyone.
You can. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's one of those things where it's either you get in there in time or you just wait for the next one.
We'll wait for the next one. Anyway,
Look, there's plenty of things you can touch on with this, and it can span out to so many different things. It's just there's not enough time in one episode.
no, there isn't. Anyway, we're going to call it. So, thank you for coming on, darling.
See you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
Take it easy, guys.